I still vividly remember having the stomach flu when I was around 3 or 4 years old. Well, not the bug itself, but the result of it. My parents felt bad for me and wanted to do something nice. So, as I was recovering, they brought home a gift for me. Mega Man 4. Amazingly, I still remember the first Robot Master I chose to go to, Dive Man, and immediately dying at the first bed of spikes after getting hit by a robot fish. But I was already a fan of Mega Man, so this didn't bother me too much. While I'll always hold on to that memory, I'm sure what most people think of when they think Mega Man 4 is a little different. You know, that little thing, being able to charge up your Mega Buster. Like the slide of Mega Man 3, this mechanic would go on to be yet another series staple that would define the Blue Bomber. So let's dissect that mechanic and more in this gameplay analysis of Mega Man 4. First I'll cover a little history, then get right into it. And for those of you just joining me, this is the 4th edition of the series where I intend to cover the gameplay design of all of the classic Mega Man games from Mega Man 1 through 11. So if I already covered a mechanic, I don't intend to retread that unless something was changed for Mega Man 4. For example, I've discussed things like how jumping and running was iterated on from Mega Man's 1 through 3, how certain enemy AI might function, how to design around a nonlinear game structure, and much, much more. So, with that, let's hop into Mega Man 4. To be honest, I really couldn't find too much behind the scenes info on Mega Man 4. Pretty much everything I know comes from either the Mega Man and Mega Man X official complete works, or perusing the credits of Mega Man 4 compared to the other games. I was able to trace back a source from Keiji Inufune remembering what it was like working on the various Rockman games, where, according to a translation from the Reploid Research Laboratory, he says, "With relatively no hardships, I really enjoyed working on this one." Outside of that, there are 3 credited planners on Mega Man 4, who I believe are basically the same thing as a game director. Bamboo is the first credited, whose real name is Yoshinori Takenaka. He also worked on Mega Man 3 as a sub-planner. As a side note, he was also a game designer on DuckTales, which is another absolutely incredible NES game. Also credited are Enough King, or Keiji Inufune, and S. Kobashi, who I can't seem to find anywhere else on the internet or credits. As Keiji Inufune expressed when working on Mega Man 5 that, once again, we had to welcome a new team leader, this meant that I had to, once again, explain the basic concept of Mega Man itself. I'm guessing that means the main director and team leader on Mega Man 4 was Bamboo, or Yoshinori Takenaka, but this is just me inferring that between him being listed first in the credits and this quote about Mega Man 5. Otherwise, there were some other returning members, like, I'm assuming Kero, who did some of the programming on Mega Man 3, is the same as Kero-chan, who did some programming on Mega Man 4, and Mega Man 4 object designer ZZ was credited as a character designer for Mega Man 3. There were also a number of new members to the team, and perhaps most notable, Hayato Kaji, who was credited as an object designer under Kei Hayato. For some reason, Wikipedia attributes Hayato Kaji as being responsible with the charge shot concept for Mega Man 4, but outside of him saying he worked on the idea, I couldn't find any source that states he came up with the idea itself. That said, he would go on to be a prominent member in many future Mega Man games, and is regularly quoted in the Mega Man and Mega Man X official complete works. It seems to me that, by Mega Man 4, while some team members remained and others cycled in or out of working on Mega Man games, the series was already a success, and it was becoming a well-oiled machine. There's no notable drama, like Mega Man 3, or any mention of the game being rushed, and as I mentioned, by Keiji Inufune's account, everything went smoothly. Booting up Mega Man 4, like Mega Man 2, players are immediately treated to an intro cutscene explaining what's happening. I mentioned in my Mega Man 3 analysis that I felt like the team likely wanted an intro for Mega Man 3 and ran out of time, and this is part of why. Mega Man 2 has an intro, 4 has an intro, and every other game after 4. While not necessary in a game like this, it still is definitely nice to get some background and story to the game. This also seemed to be a good place for the team to show off the new graphical capabilities of their latest NES chip. While fairly basic, the cityscape and explosions look incredibly nice here. In particular, I always loved this sequence of Rock riding on a train and becoming Mega Man. As a kid, both the music and this sequence got me incredibly hype, and I'd religiously watch it every time I booted up the game because I loved it that much. I know that's not game design, but hey, if an intro cutscene can stir that kind of emotion in a kid, I think they have something going for them, and it's definitely a great starting experience to a game versus just seeing a basic title screen like this, or like this. Click into Mega Man 4 and we come to the stage select. The team seemed to make a conscious decision to ditch just about every change from the stage select from Mega Man 2 to Mega Man 3 and return to how Mega Man 2 handled its stage select. While Mega Man 2 had a quick fade from black to the stage select screen, Mega Man 3 instead decided to implement a cross-wipe transition, which resulted in a number of the bugs you can easily spot on the stage select. So, Mega Man 4 reverted to the basic fade up from black, and honestly, I think that's all that's really needed here. Another change back to Mega Man 2 was that, while Mega Man 2 had this nice and simple background, Mega Man 3 instead decided to tile the logo all over the background of the stage select, which, in my opinion, ended up looking busy and sloppy. So, Mega Man 4 gets rid of the logo and is once again a simple series of lines running across this stage select screen, although this time with a gradient. Personally, I still think Mega Man 2's stage select looks the cleanest and has the best use of colors, but Mega Man 4 is still an upgrade to Mega Man 3 and looks much cleaner. One more notable aspect here is that players can actually loop their cursor selection, so if you have a character selected on the left of the screen, tapping left will bring you back to the far right of the screen. As there are so few choices in the stage select, I honestly don't think not being able to loop the cursor in the previous games is a very big deal, but it is one of those nice minor quality of life changes that I'm sure some players might appreciate. So, let's choose our first boss, and for the sake of this playthrough, we'll go through the quote-unquote smart way and choose Toadman first. With that, we come to yet another minor change up to Mega Man 4, and that's the presentation of the boss select. While I do feel like it's worth mentioning that the team changed it up and attempted something new by having a different color gradient playing through the boss select sequence depending on the boss you chose, which one you prefer over another is totally subjective, so there's not too much to say here. For my personal tastes, I still think Mega Man 2 handled its boss select the best with the most visually interesting and fun introduction. Probably the biggest change up is that Mega Man 1, Mega Man 2, and Mega Man 3 all had the bosses jump into place before doing their pose, whereas Mega Man 4 has the bosses fade up from black instead. Again, this is subjective, but I prefer the more action take from previous games of the bosses jumping into place. Whatever your take on this, we reach Toadman and our first stage of Mega Man 4. But before I get to Toadman, we need to talk about the major mechanic change of Mega Man 4, Mega Man's Charge Shot. Brand new to Mega Man 4, Mega Man can now charge up his Mega Buster for a much more powerful shot. The way the mechanic works is that after Mega Man shoots, if the player continues holding the attack button, it will charge up the Mega Buster. There's 3 levels here: an uncharged shot, which is a small, normal pellet, a middle charge, which is a larger attack, but still does the same damage as the uncharged shot, and finally, a fully charged shot, which is, once again, larger and does much more damage than an uncharged shot. It's notable, to me, the way the team decided to design how the shot itself works in terms of how players start charging, as there were a number of ways the team could have gone about this. If players press the attack button in order to, specifically, start charging their Mega Buster, Mega Man will first attempt to shoot a pellet. I say attempt to shoot a pellet because Mega Man can't shoot if, as per usual, 3 pellets are on screen, or a single charge shot is on screen, which in itself is notable. While Mega Man could only shoot 3 pellets on screen at once, likely due to the programmers using object pooling in order to better deal with speed and reduce slowdown, he can only have 1 single charge shot on screen at once. Players won't be able to shoot a second pellet while the charge shot is still on screen, so I'm not sure if this was a balancing thing or an attempt to reduce slowdown thing, but it does result in slowing down the action slightly. Interestingly, this was actually changed for the non-NES Mega Man games. In Mega Man 7, Mega Man 8, and Mega Man X, players can shoot up to 2 pellets on screen on top of the charged Mega Buster shot, once again, bringing us back to 3 total attacks on screen at once. Meanwhile, Mega Man 5 and Mega Man 6 are like Mega Man 4 in that only the charged Mega Buster shot can be on screen. So it once again makes me wonder if this was what the team wanted, or if it was due to potential slowdown issues. Anyways, back to how the charging works. The reason I think it's worth mentioning that Mega Man will attempt to shoot no matter what when the player presses the attack button, even if it's to hold down the attack for a charge shot, is another option the team could have gone with was waiting for the player to release the attack button no matter what in order to shoot. So what we get is, press the button down and Mega Man will attempt to shoot a pellet, always, then release the button, and Mega Man will do a charge shot no matter what, always. Of course, players won't realize this because the charge itself doesn't visually start or have the audio cue immediately, so there's a set timer that's working before the game decides the player is in a charge state. For Mega Man, this version of attempting an attack definitely seems like the right call. If the game waited for players to release the attack button before shooting no matter what, it would absolutely slow down the responsiveness of the attack, even if players are mashing the button. I'm pretty sure there's another thing you can do, where you can test for a button to be both pressed and released quickly, as opposed to just a press or just a release, and the team could have gone with that in order to register shooting a normal bullet attack. However, again, that runs into the issue of slowing down the responsive feel of the game, which is something you definitely wouldn't want in Mega Man. While I do think this was the right call, it does come with an interesting drawback. If players intend to charge their charge shot, they could shoot a boss or enemy accidentally, as players will have to shoot first in order to enter a charge state. And if that enemy or boss has a state where they have invincibility frames, or iframes, after getting hit, there's always the chance players could inadvertently put the boss into an iframe state when they didn't want to. Looking at it, iframes on bosses don't last as long as the charge shot takes to charge. And, you know, I would actually guess that's how the team would design boss iframes to last. They probably took into account how long the Mega Buster took to charge, and specifically timed out iframes to not last quite as long as that. Otherwise, I think you'd get a lot of really angry gamers. Although, it's definitely possible then, that an iframe state on a boss might last longer or shorter than previous games specifically based around the charge shot, for better or worse. So I was curious, and threw this on my computer to compare iframe length of bosses from Mega Man 1s through 4. I checked on a variety of bosses, and from what I can tell is this. Outside of the bosses who have knockbacks in Mega Man 1, so I'm referring to Elect Man and Cut Man, all of the other bosses spanning Mega Man 1's iframes seem to last the same length. The same could be said for all of the bosses spanning Mega Man 2, all of the bosses spanning Mega Man 3, and all of the bosses spanning Mega Man 4. And what I found was the bosses of Mega Man 4's iframes definitely lasted longer than any of the previous games, sans those 2 specific bosses with knockback. The Mega Man 4 bosses' iframes lasted more than 1.5 times the length of bosses from both Mega Man's 1 and 3, while lasting more than 2 times as long as the iframes from bosses of Mega Man 2. What this means is that it actually slows down the pace of the game, and makes it so shooting a non-charge shot is a slightly less viable option than the previous games. I'm sure this was intentional as a way to bolster the apparent strength of the charge shot, as if players could rapidly shoot bosses with the pea shooter, the more rapidly they can do so, the less worthwhile a charge shot is, to the point where a charge shot might even be detrimental to use, as it is on the various sub-bosses who have no iframes. So while longer iframes could be a minorly consequential issue for that reason, there are other drawbacks to the controls working how they do. When fighting a boss, like Toad Man, whose response is based on the player attacking, players could trigger a response they don't want when they're simply trying to charge their attack. Using the example of Toad Man, if Toad Man is attacked before he starts charging his Rain Flush attack, he'll Toad Hop over to the other side of the player. This happens even if he's in his iframe state. So here's an interesting scenario I noticed with this boss in particular. If players hit Toad Man with a charge shot, he returns to his base state where he'll stand still and wait to do his dance that triggers the Rain Flush attack. From here, if players were able to hit the attack button quick enough before the first charge shot hit and start charging their second shot, Toadman will go into his little dance. But if players don't hit the attack button before the charge shot hits Toadman and then hit the button during Toadman's iframes, simply with the intent of charging up their charge shot, the pellet will shoot out anyways, hit Toadman, and trigger Toadman to leap over the player. Of course, if players are aware of this and want Toadman to stay in place, they can always turn to the opposite direction when shooting to charge. Or if they want Toadman to jump and understand the pattern, they could always just keep shooting and then charge as soon as they trigger Toadman to leap. I think all of that requires way more thought than the average player will put into the game. For my part, I honestly never really noticed this quirk to the charge shot, that Mega Man has to attempt to shoot before he charges, and then if the charge shot is still on screen, a pellet won't shoot. But if the charge shot, or 3 pellets, aren't on screen, Mega Man will shoot a pellet. But I do think in the case of Toadman, I never really understood why he'd sometimes jump and sometimes wouldn't, and thought it was just random chance until I started testing things for this video. And if that's how the designer wants this fight to feel, that players will think Toadman will choose something random and not know why, then in that sense, this quirk is a success. But if there are bosses or enemies ever where the designer hopes players understand why the boss is doing what they're doing and wants the player to account for it, plan for it, and respond to that, such as a boss like Crash Man from Mega Man 2 or Gemini Man from Mega Man 3, I think that's where this could potentially bring about that drawback I mentioned. Moving past the mechanics of the charge shot overall, from a broader game design perspective, is interesting to me, and I think it has both pros and cons. I feel like most Mega Man fans I see are huge fans of the charge shot, but I do think that it's not necessarily an all-good mechanic, so to speak, and comes with its drawbacks. The mechanic is fun in that it allows players to feel like they have another tool at their disposal. It also widens how the team can, and really needs to, design the game. Some enemies, like larger enemies with no iframes, are better disposed of by rapid firing the Mega Buster, while others are better handled with a fully charged charge shot that does a larger amount of immediate damage. On top of that, you could have enemies who have certain behaviors, like putting up a shield after getting shot once by the Mega Buster, so a charge shot will definitely be the better choice for an enemy like that. It can also make the Mega Buster feel more powerful and seem more viable against bosses, as they typically have iframes, and so long as the team designs a charged Mega Buster attack to take off enough damage from a boss in comparison to the normal P-shooter attack. Or, as they did with Mega Man 4, since iframes last longer for the bosses than they did in previous games, it secretly makes the P-shooter attack less viable, therefore making the charge shot feel more powerful. And beyond that, it just feels cool. Mega Man has this stronger attack, and visually, it looks more powerful. But as I kinda hinted at, a number of changes had to happen due to this charge shot, and they aren't necessarily positive changes. They are, as with most things, fully subjective changes that some players will love and some won't. Starting with the bosses, before, if playing Mega Buster only, players could rapid fire at bosses to take off damage. You don't really have to be all that accurate as a player, so long as you're firing in the general correct direction, you'll probably get some hits in. However, now, with the charge shot, players can't take the rapid fire approach. Well, shouldn't at least. Technically they could, but it's highly disincentivized as the charge shot takes off so much more damage against bosses in order to give it a purpose. On top of that, because bosses' iframes now last longer in Mega Man 4, it once again highly disincentivizes rapid firing a non-charge shot, as it's actually going to be performing worse than in previous games. And speaking of which, I decided to test this out too. An uncharged Mega Buster shot deals 1 damage against bosses. A charged shot deals 3 damage against bosses. Due to the longer length of iframes bosses have in Mega Man 4, it works out that Mega Man's charge shot takes exactly as long as 2 boss iframe cycles, if not slightly less time. That means, if you're rapidly attacking the boss with the Mega Buster, if you never miss once the moment a boss's iframes end, then you'll be at just about the exact same advantage never missing once with a charge shot, because you then have to account for actually shooting a charge shot and the time it takes to travel across the screen to hit the boss. Anyways, that is so unlikely, it's probably impossible, meaning in all reality, this results in the charge shot genuinely being the better tool to use against bosses due to the increased length of the boss's iframes. So what you have then is a battle that's more about waiting to charge while you avoid attacks than making sure you're accurate in your attack when you finally do shoot a charge shot. Then, it's back to charging and waiting as you avoid attacks. Even if it isn't slower overall, it can still make some of these fights feel slower, And missing a shot with a charged Mega Buster is a much bigger setback than if players had simply missed with their pea shooter in prior Mega Man games. Beyond just the bosses, every enemy now has to be designed with the idea that Mega Man has a charge shot in mind. That means that more enemies tend to have more health in order to give the charge shot a purpose. It also means that players will probably always want to have a charge shot ready whenever they're moving along, as even if there is an enemy you'll want to rapid shoot with your Mega Buster, there's no reason not to start with a fully charged Mega Buster shot, which then means that players will constantly be hearing this charge noise. And let's be real, that can be a little annoying, and a bit of a shame, as it's playing over a generally fantastic soundtrack. Finally, this does really start to change the feel of the Mega Man games overall. When Mega Man 1 and 2 first came out, part of their brilliance was in their simplicity. Players could only jump, run, and shoot, and every stage was interestingly designed around that concept. The stages were all short, meaning all of the challenges were condensed together, making for an overall tight gameplay experience. Mega Man 3 then introduced the slide, and while I personally love the slide more so than the charge shot, it did up the complexity of the series. And now, with Mega Man 4, the charge shot has once again upped the complexity even further, as there's yet another major mechanic and tool players will have to use if they want to play properly. But with the slide mechanic, the pacing still felt frantic and quick, whereas the charge shot slows down the overall pacing a bit. As I mentioned, with the idea that players really should be taking time to charge up a shot at different points, rather than just rapid firing everything. It starts to really change the overall feel of the series, which Mega Man 4 would also do in other ways I'll be bringing up with certain optional side areas. I think it's one of those changes that was probably a good thing overall, so the games wouldn't get too stale, but to my personal taste, this new direction of upping the complexity wouldn't be perfected until the Mega Man X franchise. It's for that reason that I personally tend to hold Mega Mans 2 and 3 in higher regard than the rest of the classic franchise, although yes, I realize 9 and 10 went back to Mega Man 2's mechanics. I still love Mega Man 4 and beyond, by the way, and do enjoy the charge shot, but to my personal taste, Mega Man 3 was peak simple gameplay and mechanics, and Mega Man X would be peak complex gameplay and mechanics. I mean, relatively complex to the Mega Man franchise, of course. Now that we've discussed the charge shot, here we are in Toadman stage. Toadman stage is really clever in its overall theme of water affecting the player in different ways. It starts with an outdoor section in the rain, before players enter a sewer. Each version of the water acts as different obstacles depending on how they're presented, changing up the way players will need to play the stage. Jumping in the rain will cause Mega Man to slightly move in the direction of the rain, making it far more difficult to make short jumps against the rain's direction. However, by standing on the ground or running, the rain won't affect Mega Man at all. Then, in the sewer, the concept is flipped. Now, Mega Man will constantly move in the direction of the water flow he's standing in, and if players jump, they'll jump normally, unless they go under a little waterfall, which will push the player down. Additionally, there's a short section at the end where players can briefly be underwater, altering how Mega Man jumps, and basically acting like a reverse to the waterfall, where Mega Man now jumps higher. While the water flow itself is reminiscent of Metal Man stage from Mega Man 2, the multitude of ways the water can affect Mega Man and Toadman stage still makes it feel unique and not like a copy of the idea we'd seen in Mega Man 2. Bringing it back to the start of the stage, the progression of challenges is commendable. First, the players will encounter a number of enemies who will likely cause them to want to jump, thereby teaching the rain mechanic before ever reaching an obstacle where the stakes are dire. Soon, the players will come to a short hop that's a one-tile wide jump and fairly easy to make. At this point, players should be well aware of the mechanic, and the next jump is by far the most difficult to make, being 2 tiles wide. It's a jump that would normally be simple, but the rain mechanic makes it far more tricky. After the player makes the jump, a nice ramp down, both literally and figuratively, of the challenge. Players will have another 2-tile wide jump to make, but this time traveling downwards, and finally end on a much easier 2-tile wide jump. It's a nice way to ramp up the challenge, but still end on an easier note, giving players a softer impression of the overall opening challenge to this stage. Skipping ahead a bit, we never see the rain again in the stage, which is okay, as the stage clearly wanted to play with the player's platforming expectations in other ways. but it does seem like a missed opportunity to have the player jumping in the direction of the rain. The opening section of the stage only ever has obstacles forcing the player to jump against it, and the end of the Toadman stage introduces a brand new obstacle in a water pit with spikes the player hadn't seen yet. To me, it seems like this might have been a good opportunity to introduce a rain-like mechanic again, and have players jump with the movement of the rain in order to make far wider jumps than they normally be able to. In this section, we see some sprinklers at the top, which already opens itself up to the idea that this could have been where water was coming from. The middle section of the stage involves the water flow challenge I mentioned earlier, and honestly, I don't have too much to say about this section. I already discussed the idea of this mechanic when talking about Metal Man stage in Mega Man 2, and still, I think it's a good concept and well executed here. One final thing worth bringing up in Toadman stage are these Eskaroo snail robot sub-bosses. We'd seen some sub-bosses before in the form of the hot dogs / friender robots of Mega Man 2 and the Tomacat robots of Mega Man 3, and this is an idea that Mega Man 4 has started to lean on a little heavier, and something like the charge shot that also slows down the overall game. But I'll talk about the overall design idea in its own section after breaking down the Eskaroo. The Eskaroo has two simple attacks. Either it tosses a lob shot bomb at Mega Man's direction, or its eyeballs shoot out back and forth at Mega Man. It's a simple concept, but elevated by the fact that it shows up in two different chambers. The first chamber is empty, giving players a chance to learn and understand this sub-boss, while the second is a precarious chamber with both the waterfall and water flow players will have to contend with, all while dealing with this very same sub-boss. It's a nice way to ramp up the challenge without changing anything about the enemy, and cleverly using both the stage layout and specific challenges of this stage. Notably, this is one of those sub-bosses where I feel like it's probably quicker to kill without the charge shot and by rapid firing, or at the very least, doing a combination of the two. With that, let's talk about the sub-bosses as a concept as a whole. In Mega Man 4, you have Eskaroo, which is a snail robot, Kobatankyu, which is a hippo robot, Moby, which is a whale robot, and Whopper, which is, I don't know, a slinky robot, I guess? While all of these sub-bosses have weaknesses, like the charge shot, they really slow down the overall flow of the stages they're in, and I think your mileage on your enjoyment of this sort of thing will be pretty subjective to you. Like the Eskaroo, the Whopper is encountered in increasingly challenging chambers, while the Kobatankyu and Moby are both encountered twice and in identical chambers. What the sub-bosses do is allow the team to create unique combat-based challenges that aren't possible with the normal enemies. Players will have to deal with more complex attacks and enemies who have more defense and or health. And unlike normal enemies, who players could technically skip, these challenges are unavoidable, which will force the player into learning the best strategy for defeating each sub-boss. I think each of these sub-bosses are fun and well-designed challenges, but I'm personally not the biggest fan of them because of the fact they slow down the flow of the game, especially when the sub-boss is repeated multiple times, like in the case of the hippo or whale, without any change to the chamber they're encountered in, and for me, it makes the fights feel more like padding. It could be this says something about myself as a player, and perhaps I tend to prefer the platform-style movement challenges of the Mega Man games. I don't personally like being forced to stop and deal with these enemies, especially as multiple ones have defensive states where the player has to wait around before they can attack. And look, I am absolutely positive some people love these sub-bosses because of the unique challenges they present that normal enemies can't. I'm not saying I'm correct in preferring these games not having sub-bosses, or at the very least limiting the use of the sub-bosses, but it's worth pointing out that there are people like me who, yes, can deal with the challenges of these sub-bosses just fine, but would prefer the games not include them. And look, maybe if these bosses were only encountered once each, or at the very least, Moby and Kobatankyu hadn't been repeated twice as their fight doesn't change at all, I would view these fights more positively on the whole. For all of the fantastic stage design choices of Mega Man 4 I'm going to go over and already talked about with Toadman, for me, this is another one of those reasons Mega Man 4 doesn't make it into my personal top 2 classic Mega Man games over 2 and 3. But hey, as I said, I do think this is completely subjective, and I'd love to know where you fall on sub-bosses in the Mega Man games. Is this something that ups your enjoyment of the games, or do you prefer when the games limit their use of sub-bosses, or maybe not include them at all? Make it past the 2 Escaroo and the Spike Challenge and you'll make it to Toadman himself. Toadman, who is a total joke of a boss and probably one of the easiest bosses of any Mega Man game, period. If the player doesn't do anything at all, he'll stand in place, wiggle, and summon his Rain Flush attack. Should the player shoot him while he's wiggling prior to summoning the rain, he'll stop. Should the player shoot him when he's stopped and not wiggling, or in his iframe state, then he'll jump over the player. And that's it. Just by shooting him, you can completely stop him from attacking, unless you count him jumping over the player as an attack. On the positive end, it's not like players can just sit still and shoot repeatedly, tank the fight, and win, like Gutsman from Mega Man 1. Really though, as simple as this fight is, I don't think there's anything specifically wrong with having an easier boss like this. And honestly, I do remember as a kid being kind of relieved whenever I'd see Toadman, whether at the end of the stage or during the boss rush, as during the boss rush it was an easy way to fill up on health. As I pretty regularly say in these videos, I think bosses in the Mega Man games should be, generally speaking, designed around the idea that the player has 3 lives and should be beatable within 3 lives. But from that starting point, the devs can make the bosses easier or harder depending on what they want, and there are definitely some tough fights in Mega Man 4 Mega Buster only, or even in some cases with the weakness. So to that end, having an easier boss like this kinda balances it out. Like most bosses in Mega Man 4, Toadman only has one single weakness with no real minor weaknesses, with this one being the Drill Bomb. The Drill Bomb will deal slightly more damage than a charged Mega Buster or Pharaoh Shot, but most players really shouldn't need it. And on that note, with Toadman defeated, let's discuss boss weaknesses in Mega Man 4, as this was a pretty major change-up, probably due to the charged Mega Buster. In Mega Mans 2 and 3, most bosses had one major weakness, with typically 2 minor weaknesses. The major weaknesses of these bosses, oftentimes, would absolutely obliterate them, really making an easy mode for players who wanted it. And taking into account the non-linear nature of Mega Man, and the fact that players will be guessing which boss will be weak to any newly acquired boss weapon, I think it was a good call. It meant even if struggling players chose wrong, they might still have a minor weakness for the boss at hand, and could use that to still give them a better shot at defeating the boss after making it all the way through the stage and risking a game over. But Mega Man 4 completely nixes this concept, with almost every boss only having one single weakness. Toadman is weak to Drill Man, Drill Man is weak to Dive Man, Dive Man is weak to Skull Man, Skull Man is weak to Dust Man, Dust Man is weak to Ring Man, Ring Man is weak to Pharaoh Man, Pharaoh Man is weak to Bright Man, Bright Man is weak to Toadman, and now we've looped. But as I said, the secondary weaknesses are gone, meaning players who are struggling will have to really hope they chose correctly, especially in some of the more difficult bosses of Mega Man 4. On top of that, the major weaknesses of these bosses are nowhere near as strong as the major weaknesses of the bosses from previous Mega Man games. To give you some examples, Magnet Man is weak to Spark Shock and Shadow Blade, both of which deal 7 damage. Needle Man is weak to Gemini Laser, which, again, deals 7 damage. Air Man is weak to Leaf Shield, which deals 8 damage. Bubble Man is weak to Metal Blade, which does, well, only 4 damage, but can pretty much be shot in rapid succession. But you kinda get my point that a lot of these bosses can be very quickly destroyed with their major weakness. In Mega Man 4, Charged Pharaoh Shot and Flash Stopper asides, each boss's major weakness deals 4 total damage to them. Meanwhile, a Charged Mega Buster Shot, or Charged Pharaoh Shot for that matter, deals 3 damage. So really, not that much more powerful than a Charged Mega Buster Shot. The main thing you're getting as far as an advantage goes, comparatively, is not needing to wait for the Mega Buster to charge, although you do still have to wait for the now longer iframes to play out on these bosses. What that all results in is, to my opinion, a much more challenging game overall in terms of the bosses. And while Toadman is definitely the odd one out in how simple and easy he is, I think many of the bosses in Mega Man 4 are much more challenging than most of the bosses of previous games. From Drill Man to Ring Man and Skull Man, some of these bosses can be pretty challenging if you don't understand how to deal with their patterns. Sometimes, even if you have the boss weakness, as once again, the boss weaknesses aren't as OP as in previous games. And you don't even get a secondary weakness with most of these bosses. While I definitely don't mind the difficulty here, I do think the lack of secondary weaknesses are a bit of a shame, because I do think it could help with player frustration for those new players who aren't as skilled at the Mega Man games. So, with Toadman defeated, let's move on to the boss weak to his Rain Flush, Bright Man. Bright Man's stage has two main concepts that its stage explores. The idea going with the theme of the boss, that Mega Man can shoot certain enemies which will cause the lights to turn off, then shoot other enemies that will turn on the lights, and then a couple spike portions with these grasshopper robots that players will have to navigate through. It's nice to see such strong concepts in this stage, and in particular, I really like the lights off and on concept we see here. The light bulb enemies, or 100 Watan, can definitely get in Mega Man's way just by virtue of flying horizontally into Mega Man, and have a somewhat annoying attack in their bombs they drop which explode into more bullets. So, naturally, players will want to destroy the enemy, and doing so will cause the lights to turn off in the stage. With the lights off, players will only be able to see enemies and, later on, obstacles. So it's really clever that the team made this enemy one players would want to destroy, as it can be annoying to leave alive. At the same time, it's not impossible to get through these sections without destroying the light bulb enemy, just a little harder as there will be more obstacles on the screen, making this a really nice balance, and cool that there's two different ways to tackle the exact same challenge. There's also a nice ramping of difficulty with two different ideas combined for the lights on and off sections. The first is a standard platform segment to introduce the concept, and then, later in the stage, players can go to an optional side area which will introduce in an easier manner these traveling platforms. The final segment is a much more difficult traversal combining the two ideas, and it works really nicely. This stage is a sandwich stage, with the lights on and off sections making up the bread, and the middle section is a series of grasshopper robot challenges, which I think is a little more flawed. The concept itself is fine. Have these challenge sequences over a bed of spikes with a moving platform. It's also nice that this is over a bed of spikes, as if players get injured and fall off of the grasshopper, or can't destroy one of the totem poles in time, there's still an iframe grace period before they'll instantly die. My real gripe here is that, for some reason, the hop length of the grasshoppers can vary, and as such, it can cause them to sometimes never overlap with one another, which would seem to be the intended idea, but other times overlap with each other if they end up making an extended jump and making it past the obstacle that seems like was meant to force them away. But I'm honestly not sure if this was intentional or not. Maybe the designers wanted there to be a chance that this challenge could be easier or harder. I really don't know, but I don't think the overlapping grasshoppers ends up feeling good, and can be pretty frustrating when one moving platform is jumping into Mega Man and basically forcing him to take a ride the wrong way. It's not like this is impossible or anything, it really just makes the overall sequence a little more challenging, but something about it feels a little off to me, even if it was the intention. Otherwise though, I do like the overall concept at play here. One more thing I want to note, while I'm not the biggest fan of how the grasshoppers ended up being executed because of their occasional penchant to hop into each other, I do like that it ties together the stage as a whole, as it's a moving platform challenge, and the final challenge of the stage is also a moving platform challenge. I would guess tying the stage together with moving platforms like this was intentional, and it's a really clever bit of overall stage design. Something I briefly touched on, but figured was worth its own segment, is the optional area Mega Man can travel to that has these moving platforms. For completing this mini challenge, players will be rewarded with an E-Tank and a 1-Up. And as this is a side area, like any side content, players won't immediately know which direction is the correct direction when they first play the game, meaning players who want all of the secrets might miss this by accident, and players who don't want to explore side content might wind up here by accident. One issue with this particular room is that, really, this is the room that teaches players in a safe way how to use these moving platforms before the final challenge of the stage, which would end up utilizing them. So it's a little odd to have the teaching tool tucked away as an optional content. This might sound like I'm being a little overly harsh with this, but to be clear with you, I love secrets in video games, and I love side content in video games. Hell, this is footage of me playing King's Field where I'm just rubbing up against a wall, mashing the X button, hoping to find and open a secret wall. I unironically find this enjoyable, because it feels that cool to find a secret to me. But when it comes to the Mega Man games, I think this sort of exploration and side content has some particularly unique pros and cons. This little section is really the worst in that, really, I think at least one of these moving platforms should have been somewhere in the stage proper to teach players this mechanic. Otherwise, all of the side content in Mega Man 4 stands as its own little optional challenge with a reward. Skullman stage has an optional side area where players will find an E-tank for completing its challenge. Pharaoh Man stage has an optional secret area where players will find the balloon ability. Ringman stage has an optional side room with an eddy. Finally, Dive Man stage has an optional, sort of secret area with the wire ability. Up until this point, there were optional challenges players could complete in order to obtain special rewards. But all of these secrets were on the same screen as the normal traversal of the player, making it so players would never need to travel out of their way to get these. So it's a pretty major change up here to, instead, have these alternate paths. On the surface, this would, of course, seem like a good thing. More paths means more to play, more challenges, and secrets. And all of that would, of course, be what's nice about these areas. But the drawback is, like the charge attack or sub-bosses, this starts to once again take away from the initial concept of the Mega Man games. Akira Kitamura, the planner and creator of the first two Mega Man games, specifically designed the games to be able to be completed within an hour, and tracked how long it would take to complete each stage in order to accomplish this goal. This idea, combined with the simple gameplay of the original Mega Man games, would result in their quick and clean gameplay, with challenges rarely doubled up on, and I think are what contributed to each level's unique feel and brisk pacing. So, with this exploration, that of course takes away from these stages being as short and sweet, and starts to draw out the length of them a little bit. I'm not saying this is an inherently bad thing, by the way, it's just a different thing, and starts to make the games feel a little different overall. Like the charge shot, this is another element that starts to move the Mega Man games in a direction which, to my opinion, would really be perfected in the Mega Man X series, where these ideas are explored much further and really given more room to breathe. If I were to try to put my finger on it, and explain further why I think this exploration feels a little better, to me, in Mega Man X compared to the classic series, I think I could break it down into three factors. 1. The games have a larger array of more interesting things to find. From power-ups like health extensions to abilities, these are much more exciting overall. And 2, unlike most of the classic series, the Mega Man X games don't only scroll horizontally, but also scroll vertically. While there's nothing wrong with a purely horizontal scroller, like Mega Man, having plenty of exploration in it, I do think that added verticality makes exploration more interesting overall, and really opens it up. A lot of the exploration in the classic series, save for 7 and 8, and to an extent 6, where abilities will be opening up certain hidden secrets, comes down to, there are 2 ladders going in 2 different directions, or there's a ladder or a choice to move horizontally. Which do you choose? It feels less like exploration and more like making a simple choice. Finally, the third reason. Combining both of the previous factors about the X series, it already changes the pacing of the game quite a bit. While yes, you could speed through the game if you want, you're really encouraged to take your time, find, at the very least, heart upgrades to raise your health, and are vastly rewarded for finding various ability upgrades. 7 and 8 head in a direction closer to X in making exploration and replaying stages far more encouraged, but to my opinion, neither hit the mark as strongly as the X games. On the positive side, as I mentioned, outside of making an enjoyable game longer, the challenges in Brightman and Skullman stages, while not too difficult, are still unique challenges, and completing them will also serve the purpose of not only gaining a helper item, but also helping the player become better at the game. As someone who would always try to jump over long jumps just for fun and to see if I could make it, Pharaoh Man stage has a super cool secret in making it so one of those longer jumps actually rewards the player with an optional helper ability. Meanwhile, Dive Man stage could trick players into thinking it's an instant death pit, when in reality, it's a nice little spike wall drop challenge, also rewarding players with a cool helper item. The Eddy Room in Ringman stage serves as an out-of-the-way helpful item, and these little side rooms will continue to appear in some future games as well. Another positive thing about these side areas is that if players feel it's padding, they can just skip it. I don't always feel like I need the E-Tank or extra life of Brightman stage, for example, so sometimes I'll totally ignore the area. So, to my opinion, while I like the idea of these sorts of areas a lot, I think I prefer my base Mega Man games to be more short and sweet, a la Mega Man 2 and 3, while I like X for those exploratory elements. But if you're someone who loves this direction for these games, I understand. Make it through Brightman stage, and you'll reach Brightman himself. Brightman is, overall, pretty simple in his pattern. He'll hop around the screen and occasionally shoot a number of projectiles at Mega Man. Once his health reaches a certain point, he'll freeze Mega Man using his Flash Stopper ability, and then, while Mega Man is frozen, either shoot his projectiles at Mega Man, hop at Mega Man, or do a combo of the two. In a lot of ways, this boss is pretty much Flashman from Mega Man 2 2.0. The only major difference being, Flashman would chase the player on a multi-layered surface, while instead of chasing the player, Brightman hops around on a flat surface. Similar to Flashman, if the player jumps at the right time, they can avoid Brightman's projectile shot. And outside of the fact that Brightman will use his Flash Stopper specifically once his health gets to a certain point, he also has a nice big tell, meaning that perceptive players should be able to react and jump in time to avoid his projectiles. The only thing is, if Brightman hops at the player, which in my testing he pretty regularly chose to do, I think there's a near 100% chance you're going to get hit, even if you're perceptive and have good reflexes. And that stinks. It's not like this fight is super difficult, and as Toadman's Rain Flush is a full screen attack, it makes it so players who want to use Brightman's weakness can repeatedly shoot without needing to aim at Brightman, and can focus on avoiding the boss. I still don't like this high luck factor in not getting hit. Even if you're not going for a no-hit run, it seems pretty unfair to me that, as a player, you'd properly react in time to an attack and still be punished for it. Outside of Brightman occasionally jumping at the player after freezing them, I think overall, I actually like this fight more than Flashman's fight. It feels less like a battle of trading blows, and reacting to both the leaping and projectiles are fun to me. I also like Brightman's tell for his Flash Stopper and think is fun to try to react to. Defeat Brightman and you'll obtain his Flash Stopper ability, which is just like Flashman's Time Stopper from Mega Man 2, but more interesting. However, I'll break down the boss weapons after going through all of the stages. And speaking of which, now that we're a couple stages in, I want to talk about the overall stage design in Mega Man 4 versus the previous games. This is something I talked about in Mega Man 2, and even deeper in Mega Man 3, and in that video on Mega Man 3, I mentioned I'd go over Mega Man 4's stage designs because I think, in terms of overall stage cohesion, Mega Man 4 did a really good job. Mega Man 2 stages were mostly focused on certain themes. You're in an underground maze. You're high up in the air, so it's all insta-death challenges. You're in the water and can jump high. You're climbing, etc. As I mentioned in my Mega Man 3 video, those overall ideas are mostly gone, and the stages were more obstacle or enemy focused. And while there were some stages that had great overall cohesion to them, with obstacles that all mixed together and built on each other, like Sparkman stage, there were other stages, like Shadow Man stage, which were just a series of pretty much disparate challenges that didn't feel at all connected. Then there were other stages, like Top Man stage or Magnet Man stage, that had some really good concepts in them, but it didn't feel like the concepts were really explored to their fullest extent in the stages, and like there were a lot of missing opportunities, likely because of how rushed Mega Man 3 was. So we come to Mega Man 4. While Mega Man 4 doesn't have the same general ideas of Mega Man 2, as I think it's hard to find those and repeat them once they've already been done. I mean, Elect Man and Crash Man stage were both climb vertically stages, and I'm not sure how many variations on that we really need. Each stage of Mega Man 4 has some set of obstacle, stage, or enemy concept, and really does a nice job of exploring those concepts throughout the entirety of the stage. Toadman stage, as I mentioned, is all about different ways water can take away full control from the player, and the player needing to navigate obstacles based around that. Brightman stage has two major challenges in the Grasshoppers and the Lights On/Lights Off challenge, and both get an easy and difficult version of the same challenge. Pharaoh Man stage has two major sections. The first is dealing with enemies while on quicksand, and the second is an indoor section where players will have to deal with these mummy robots, moving shooting platforms on spikes, or a combination of the two. Ringman stage is all about these collapsing platforms, with the entire stage built around them and occasional breaks to fight different sub-bosses. Dustman stage is, well, probably the least cohesive of the bunch. There's not really a major idea I could point to from a game design perspective. It seems to me like the art design is the only thing really tying this stage together. Skullman stage is a maze-like enemy-based stage with a lot of smaller corridors that force players into properly tackling each enemy presented. Dive Man stage is the first time we see the water mechanic of Bubble Man stage really truly reintroduced and explored. While Bubble Man stage was all about not jumping too high, Dive Man stage seems more based on the player utilizing Mega Man's underwater jump height to jump the correct amount in order to make it through various obstacles that could destroy Mega Man. Finally, Drill Man stage is awful, and I hate it, and that's what ties it together. So you can see how Mega Man 4, for the most part, does a really nice job of making each stage feel unique beyond just the art or music direction. It truly feels like each stage had a lot of thought put into it, and how to make it unique compared to the others, and even unique compared to previous games. Okay, for real though, back to Drill Man stage. Similar to Dust Man stage, I don't think there's really an idea that ties this stage together. It seems like a couple of different general challenges and concepts strung together in sequence. Interestingly, Dustman and Drillman stages were always my least favorite, even as a kid. I think that honestly probably has to do with me not particularly liking the music of those stages, or being in them in general, due to something about the art direction. But it's interesting revisiting this and trying to pull myself away from my biases and finding that I really do think these are some of the least cohesive in terms of overall stage design. And there are other things to ding those stages for other than something as dumb as I don't happen to like a song very much, or I don't feel good in this red dirt. But enough negativity, let's move on to a stage I always loved as a kid, in part because of the music. Oh, it's a banana, it's yellow and round and yummy. Oh, it's a banana, it's yellow and round and yummy. I made up those lyrics to Pharaoh Man stage when I was somewhere between 3 and 6 years old. And yes, I still remember them and sing them to myself anytime I play this stage, even though bananas aren't round. I was a little kid when I came up with this, and I didn't know how to describe the oblong shape of a banana. Leave me alone. Back to design though. In a way, Pharaoh Man stage comprises of two completely different challenges. There's the portion that's outside of the tomb and the portion inside of the tomb. Thematically, of course, this all makes sense, even if the challenges are completely different. The first outer portion of the tomb is a section filled with quicksand, where players will need to regularly jump as they also contend with a couple basic enemies. It's a basic premise, and really isn't explored too fully. For example, the scorpion will make the player want to jump, while the bug that flies overhead will just be something the player has to move to avoid. But as the quicksand will kill the player if they aren't jumping, a more interesting idea might have been an enemy that players will want to avoid by not jumping, forcing them to wait if they should jump to avoid dying in the quicksand or jump to deal with this other enemy or obstacle. There are plenty of other ways to riff off of this idea, by the way. This was just the first idea that came to my mind. Either way, it is an opening section, and it's still fun for what it is, even if the idea probably could have been explored a little more interestingly. On that subject, it seems like the team did have more in mind for this section. There's actually footage of Rockman 4 at the Tokyo Game Show I found thanks to the YouTube channel Rockman A New Menace that shows an early playable version of the game. And one of the things we see in this early footage is an additional sub-boss the team had created for Pharaoh Man stage. It looks like the idea here was the players would need to jump on the boulders to attack the Sphinx. Honestly, given my thoughts on the sub-bosses, I'm kinda glad this was cut, but it's fun to point out that they were experimenting with more. Inside the tomb, you'll find a few enemies, primarily these bats and these mummies, as well as a moving platform over a bed of spikes that also shoots. The obstacle reminds me a bit of the flying platforms from Iceman's stage of Mega Man 1, but much better done, as not only is the obstacle not broken, like it is in Mega Man 1, where sometimes the platform detection didn't work, but it's a more simplified idea, and for that, I think it works better. The obstacle platforms from Iceman's stage would travel in a random pattern in the air, while also randomly shooting. It made for not just a tricky traversal, but one that, at times, felt downright unfair, or would even lead to the player potentially getting stuck due to a bad pattern. Airman stage from Mega Man 2 did a good job of stripping down the concept into a better idea, with a moving platform that's on a set path, and with an enemy on top who can attack the player, but also be destroyed. So once again, here's that same similar idea. Like in Iceman stage, it's the platform that shoots, but this time it only travels horizontally and activates once the player jumps on it. That makes for an interesting obstacle that can still attack and hurt the player, but much more fair and readable. It's also nice to see the enemies work in conjunction with the obstacle. First, we're introduced to the mummies in a safe place. Then, players will have to deal with the obstacle while also dealing with bats, who can knock the players off of the platform and onto the bed of spikes underneath. Finally, the mummies and moving platform are combined for the final challenge, bringing together these two challenges for something unique and also interesting. All of this results in a fun stage with a nice overall theme both in its design and art direction. One final thing about this stage is there's a secret, and one that I mentioned before. Hop over the drop into the tomb and you'll find a secret area with the balloon ability. It's a cool secret for someone like me, who always liked to see if I could leap over the jumps anyways, so it was a shocking and cool surprise to actually be rewarded for it. These secret abilities found in stages are something that was actually brought back from Mega Man 1, but I think handled in a much better way. In Mega Man 1, players could find the M ability, or Magnet Beam, in Electman stage. In order to get this secret ability, players would need to have Gutsman's ability to access it, or technically, according to the comments in my Mega Man 1 video, Electman's ability would also work, but I don't know why players would be replaying this stage with that ability before they defeated Gutsman. Anyways, I talk about this quite a bit in my Mega Man 1 video, but the main point was that, while this ability seemed to be secret, it was actually required to progress through Wily Stage 1, and as this isn't a Metroidvania style game and players shouldn't expect that sort of thing, I thought it was overall a negative that there was this secret ability players might completely miss that ended up being required. So here in Mega Man 4, once again, there's hidden secret helper tools. These tools are the balloon ability, which is reminiscent of item 1 from Mega Man 2, and the wire ability. But unlike Mega Man 1, these abilities are never required for progression and are truly optional, really fixing the major flaw with the Magnet Beam of Mega Man 1. What this also means is that the team decided to bring back being able to replay stages. In Mega Man 1, players could re-enter a stage they'd already completed, likely so they could find the Magnet Beam in case they missed it. Meanwhile, Mega Mans 2 and 3 took out the ability to replay stages, and now, likely due to these optional abilities, players can once again replay stages in Mega Man 4. I talked in detail about the pros and cons to being able to replay stages in my Mega Man 2 design analysis, so I don't want to retread that ground here. If you're interested in that design conversation, I direct you to please go back to that video. But I did want to mention that it was brought back here, as it would feel like a pretty glaring omission if I didn't. On the abilities themselves, the wire and balloon pretty much act like better versions of the rush coil. With the wire ability, you do need a ceiling above you in order to use it, so it's a little more limited in that sense. The balloon ability, similar to item 1 of Mega Man 2, is limited to 3 balloons on screen at once, although I don't think that's really going to ever end up mattering. While I think these abilities are fun to use, and I honestly prefer using them over Rush Coil, they really are pretty much the same exact thing, and I think outside of one instance I was able to find where the balloon was more handy than Rush Coil in Dr. Cossack's Fortress, or maybe this one moment in the optional area of Skullman stage, it was difficult for me to find spots where these abilities really made any real difference. And look, to be fair, I'm sure there are spots I just don't know, but I think most players won't be able to find much usage for these that Rush Coil couldn't do anyways. So to that end, while these abilities are cool to find, and the completionist in me needs to have them every time I play Mega Man 4, I think they're honestly pretty pointless. I'm glad that they're never required like the Magnet Beam of Mega Man 1, but I do think the future Mega Man games found far better solutions with optional things Mega Man could find. From Beat of Mega Man 5 to Proto Man's Shield in Mega Man 7, these tools feel like far more worthwhile secrets to me. Make it to the end of the tomb, and you'll reach Pharaoh Man himself. I think of Pharaoh Man as a more difficult version of Sparkman from Mega Man 3. He'll jump around and shoot projectiles at Mega Man. While jumping, these will be uncharged shots, and then he'll occasionally stop to charge up a larger blast, which of course deals far more damage to Mega Man. Because he attacks while jumping, he can be pretty difficult to avoid. but his charge shot does give a bit of a break for players to get attacks in. I do like this balance though. The charge shot is predictable and easy to read and avoid, but is far more punishing for messing up. Then, the normal attacks and contact damage are far harder to avoid but less punishing. So, while difficult, it does make the fight feel fair. Honestly, I don't have too much else to say about Pharaoh Man, but it's interesting how his weakness of the Flash Stopper works, especially compared to how the Time Stopper worked against Quick Man. In Mega Man 2, Mega Man couldn't shoot when using the similar Time Stopper attack, so the only boss who's weak to it is Quick Man. However, how the attack worked was that it would slowly drain Quick Man's health, with it draining halfway. After that, the player would be on their own to finish the fight. The Flash Stopper, on the other hand, only temporarily freezes time, but still allows Mega Man to shoot a non-charged shot. As such, there will be moments in between freezing time where Pharaoh Man can potentially hit the player, but otherwise, this is definitely the most powerful Robot Master weakness in the entire game. Once Pharaoh Man is in a good spot to freeze, players can mash the attack button, which will freeze time, then make Mega Man shoot, and then when the ability is up, cycle back to freezing time. It's interesting how powerful it is compared to the rest of the abilities of Mega Man 4, but I do think I prefer this over how the Time Stopper worked against Quick Man. With Pharaoh Man defeated, Mega Man will receive the Pharaoh Shot, so it's on to Ring Man. Ring Man stage is one of my favorites from Mega Man 4. The entire idea is built around these platforms that shrink and regrow after Mega Man steps on them. The concept around this obstacle on its own is a great concept, so it's nice to see how many different ways the team played with it. First is a long vertical traversal, which also acts as a great teaching tool. There's no imminent danger for falling, so players will learn in a safe manner how this obstacle works. The stage also starts with the player immediately landing on one of these platforms, and if they don't react, they'll automatically dodge the turret shooting at them by falling through the gap. So really, a brilliant way to safely introduce two obstacles at the exact same time. Another fun detail to this vertical climb is, as Pharaoh Man's attack while charging stores the projectile above Mega Man, not only does the Pharaoh Shot act as Ring Man's weakness here, but it's also a great tool for vertically climbing, as the fully charged shot can destroy enemies above Mega Man without wasting any ammo. The middle portion of the stage sees the platforms reintroduced after a sub-boss with portions Mega Man might want to jump through from below, as well as one spike pit, slowly introducing danger. So finally, we reach the most difficult portion of the stage, with a large platforming challenge of these growing platforms, but this time with them also detracting and growing from the opposite side as the prior rainbow ones, slightly altering the challenge. The only thing that really breaks up these platform challenges are a series of sub-bosses, the hippo-like Kabatonkyu and the Whopper. The Kabatonkyu is an interesting concept, as while the game overall seems to encourage players use the charge shot instead of Mega Man's normal pea shooter, really, this boss is far better handled by rapid firing, as he's on a stack of rings that are destroyed when shot, bringing him down to the player's range to shoot, but reform after a certain period of time. While I don't really see why the team decided to put two identical fights here, I do think the hippo fight itself is well executed. The other sub-boss we get is the Whopper. The Whopper will shoot out its rings, both attacking Mega Man and creating an opening at the same time where the player can attack. This sub-boss is the opposite, where saving a charge shot for the brief window when the Whopper attacks and exposes his opening is definitely the best strategy. The team also does a nice job of introducing the boss in a large chamber, then having the second encounter with the Whopper closer to Mega Man, and thereby far more dangerous. So here I am, a little torn. Part of me wishes, if there was going to be sub-bosses, that the stage only have one and moved on, but I do think both sub-bosses are well designed, and I like that they require opposite strategies from the Mega Buster, which is a cool balance. So to that end, I really think the best course here might have just been to remove one Kabatonkyu, as it's just a repeat. And to my suggestion, I'd remove the one early on at the top of the climb. It kind of feels right to me. Of the two, the second one remain, which guards the checkpoint to the stage. There is one more element in Ring Man's stage that's present in a few other stages in Mega Man 4, and brand new to the series, Eddie. Eddie is a little helper robot who will head towards Mega Man, and when Mega Man is in a close enough X-axis to him, he'll shoot out a random helper item. This item could be a health recharge, energy recharge, 1-up, or if you're especially lucky, an E-Tank. According to Keiji Inafune, Eddie was an idea that came to us while we were working on 2. Instead of just placing an item to be discovered by the player, we wanted a character in a supporting role that would behave kinda like a lottery. You never knew what to expect, and we wanted the player to be really happy or really disappointed depending on what came out. That's all fine and good, but I hate Eddie, and I think it's a terrible bit of design. Mega Man 3 achieved something similar in his question mark blocks Mega Man could shoot, which would randomly drop some item, good or bad. So Eddie seems to be the evolution of this concept, where now it's a cute robot with more personality. And while I understand that aspect, Eddie has a huge problem. While the question mark block of Mega Man 3 is gone after Mega Man shoots it, good reward or no, Eddie will only disappear if the player picks up the item that he tosses at them. So in practice, what this results in is that if players don't like the item Eddie tosses, they'll then exit the screen, re-enter the screen, wait for Eddie to shoot another item, see if it's what they want, and then repeat the process over and over again until they finally get a good item. At least, that's what I would do as a kid. Every single time I saw Eddie. Unless I got an E-Tank, I wasn't satisfied, so I was repeating this process over and over and over again, which is super tedious and boring. I'd much rather there be some sort of interesting platform or enemy challenge for an E-Tank rather than this monotony. And yes, this is optional and you don't need to do it, but I really think it's highly incentivized. Because as soon as players figure out that Eddie won't leave until they pick up the item, there's no real reason for players not to try and get the best item. The solution here, if they wanted to keep Eddie instead of an item and wanted this random factor, would have been simple. Just make it so no matter what, Eddie only tosses one item, then disappears, just like the question mark blocks of Mega Man 3. I'm not necessarily against the random chance idea. While it's not my favorite idea to leave getting something as important as an E-Tank up to total luck here, I think I'd be okay with simply being disappointed to not get it, then moving on, or being super excited to get one and moving on. But because of the way Eddie works, like the exploration, charge shot, and sub-bosses, this is yet another one of those little things that would end up slowing down the pace of the game, and in this case, I don't think there's any way to argue it's in a good way. But I will concede that Eddie is a cute little guy. After platform challenges and sub-bosses galore, players will reach Ring Man. Ring Man's overall pattern is pretty simple. He'll toss a couple rings at Mega Man that act like boomerangs, then run across the screen, and repeat. Sometimes just for good measure, and to make the fight harder, he'll also toss a ring as he's running. So in some ways, this boss pattern is kinda like Hardman's of Mega Man 3, as Hardman's Hard Knuckle would also somewhat boomerang back in a way. While the overall idea is pretty simple, his attacks can be surprisingly difficult to avoid due to their speed, especially if he decides to attack Mega Man while running across the screen. Apparently, this attack is actually a retaliation to if the player shoots Ring Man while he's running across the screen, which is something I honestly never knew or noticed. So taking that into account definitely makes this fight easier. But I have to guess that a lot of newer players, or even returning players, would be like me, and not realize this is a retaliatory attack, making Ring Man's fight especially difficult for those players. Ring Man is weak to the Pharaoh shot. While a fully charged Pharaoh shot does good damage against Ring Man, because of the way the projectile works and that it charges on top of Mega Man, there's a good chance players will accidentally hit Ring Man when they didn't want to, and were trying to recharge the shot, messing up the charge cycle, as that will force players to need to once again recharge the Pharaoh shot. It's an interesting quirk, and I'm not sure if this was by design or by happenstance, but it results in the Pharaoh shot not being quite as strong at taking down Ring Man as it could otherwise have been. With Ring Man defeated and the Ring Boomerang on hand, it's time to head over to Dust Man. As I mentioned earlier, this is one of those stages that doesn't really have a through line in its overall concept. It's 3 totally distinct challenges. First is this area with shield attackers, who I always called hot dog enemies as a kid, and I'm going to continue to do so, and an introduction to up and down robots. The hot dog robots are a really clever design idea and something that Hayato Kaji came up with. It's a simple idea, but a good one. The front of the hot dog is guarded by a giant shield, while the back is open to attacks. Depending on how they're placed, Players can either stand in a safe spot and destroy it from there, will be forced to jump over the hot dogs in order to avoid them and attack their weak spot, or be required to slide under the hot dogs in order to both attack and avoid them. So I really like the versatility at play with them and how the team was able to create different situations based on the stage design and enemy layouts in order to create unique combat situations with the hot dogs. I will say, the hot dog enemy concept wasn't really explored too much in Dustman's stage, but definitely shines later on in Skullman's stage. The other concept we get here are the up and down robots, which are another enemy I think has a great concept. We actually saw something like the up and down robot back in Mega Man 2 with this jumping fish robot at Dr. Wily's castle. But players would pretty much automatically avoid this fish so long as they jumped high enough, making it a non-obstacle. So here, in Mega Man 4, we get that same concept reimagined and executed far better. If the player jumps over the pit without stopping to think, the up and down will shoot up, hit Mega Man, and knock him back into the pit they came from, causing a death. So it'll require players to stop and time out shooting one in order to proceed. While I do think it's a good obstacle that plays with the idea of an enemy getting in the way of the player and utilizing Mega Man's knockback factor as the true attack, the only downside is that players will have no idea these enemies are in pits unless they get close enough, and probably too late for a new player to react. So to that extent, they can definitely be unfair for a new player, so it would have been nice if there was some sort of tell that a pit would include one of these. While you could certainly argue that's the intention of the enemy, and part of the danger is that it's a surprise, I'm not the biggest fan of a surprise instant death, and I do think this verges on unfair for new players. So really, some sort of visual tell that a pit will contain these, even if it was in the background, would have been all I'd ask for. Moving along, we get the second major section of Dustman's stage, and yet another enemy I'd like to briefly discuss. The main challenge here are these platforms that are built in front of the player, with the player needing to wait for them to form and traverse them over an instant death pit and spiked trap area. To spice things up, a few Taketento robots are placed along the path, forcing the player to react to an enemy while also platforming. The blocks are pretty big at 2 tiles, so it doesn't end up being all that difficult, especially since the blocks never unform. I think that might have made this section a little more interesting if the blocks unmade themselves after a certain time, making the players wait to progress until one forms, but then need to immediately progress as the platform they're on is about to unmake itself. But I digress. The challenge at hand is fine, especially for a mid-stage obstacle. The enemy I wanted to discuss is this Jumbig. They appear in multiple stages throughout Mega Man 4 and are a rehash of an idea that we saw in both Mega Man 1 and Mega Man 3. This Jumbig is a recreated turkey robot, or Big Eye, from Mega Man 1. The turkey robots were problematic in that, unless players had the Ice Beam and knew that they could utilize it to freeze the turkey robots in the air mid-big hop, they were bullet sponges, took off a third of Mega Man's health if they hit him, and had absolutely no tell for if they were going to do an unavoidable short leap or an avoidable big leap, with not enough time for the player to really react. It felt like a lot of luck at play for these guys. So, Mega Man 3 took that same concept for Bicky, but instead made it so there was only one jump height and a nice big tell. In order to be safe, players would need to react quickly and slide, but because of the combo of reacting to the tell and needing to slide, it made for a fun enemy. Now, in Mega Man 4, the team has once again reimagined the same overall concept for the Jumbig. Like the turkey robots of Mega Man 1, the Jumbig is a bit of a bullet sponge, deals a large chunk of damage for touching the player, and once again, has no tell for if it's going to do a small hop or a large hop. But, and this is a big but, thanks to I know what that sounds like. Thanks to Mega Man's new ability to slide, the player now has enough time to react to the large jump, even with no tell, and make it underneath, making for a far better and far less frustrating enemy. I also like that it's not quite as much of a bullet sponge. It goes to show that the original concept, which I complained quite a bit about in my Mega Man 1 video, was a good concept, but just needed a little tweaking. The final portion of Dustman's stage is this giant garbage compressor, or at least that's what I take it to be. On an individual level, it's a pretty interesting challenge in this compressor moving up and down, and if Mega Man gets stuck between the compressor and ground, he'll get smushed and instantly die. There's a bunch of garbage blocking the player's path, and players will need to clear out the garbage on a tile-by-tile basis in order to create a safe path, otherwise be crushed. A fun little tidbit too is that Ringman's Ring Boomerang does a pretty good job quickly clearing these, and acts like the charged Mega Buster shot, which can travel through garbage tiles, destroying multiple ones at once. While this is an interesting challenge in that it requires players to slow down and really think about how they're creating their path, it's never been my favorite just because it does feel like it slows down the momentum of the stage so much. That said, if you take a look at something kind of similar, like the Fish Eggs of Gemini Man stage from Mega Man 3, where players were also shooting and creating their own path, but with little to no consequence, this sequence is far more interesting. So I do like that they took a concept that was somewhat explored in Mega Man 3 and made a much more interesting design around it here. Make it through the garbage chute and you'll reach the Junk King, Dustman. Dustman is a boss with a simple but fun attack pattern. He'll either jump into the air with large, easy to read and avoid arcs, use his vacuum to suction in the player towards him, becoming invincible, a la Magnet Man's very similar suction attack from Mega Man 3, and shoot his Dust Crusher attack at the player. The real point of interest here is the Dust Crusher attack. The projectile will break once it reaches Mega Man's X location on the stage and shoot diagonally in all directions across the screen. So this results in two strategies players can employ. Either run and jump over the block, so Mega Man lands horizontally to it before it breaks, or, and what's really the ideal strategy, jump straight up at the right timing once the projectile comes close to Mega Man, so it breaks underneath him and the diagonal strikes shoot safely out of harm's way. He's not the most difficult boss, but I find this reactionary gameplay to be a lot of fun. Dustman is weak to the Ring Boomerang, which is really where that run and jump strategy can sometimes pay off, as the Ring Boomerang is a limited range attack. And I always like that trade-off of a more powerful attack, like the Ring Boomerang being his weakness, having limited range and putting players more so in the danger zone. With Dustman defeated, before moving on, I do want to talk a little bit about some general concepts that persist throughout the stage. The first of those being the pause menu. It's a pretty big change up from Mega Man's 1 through 3 in that it's a full screen menu. Mega Man 1 and 2 had similar pause screens in that the menu would pop up somewhere on the screen while the action froze behind it. Meanwhile, Mega Man 3 had a pull-up pause menu from the bottom of the screen, but players could still see the pause game behind it. While Mega Man 1 only had one menu page for all of its abilities, as there were only 6 abilities and one special ability, Mega Man 2 had to expand the pause menu to 2 menu pages, as there were now 8 abilities, 3 special abilities, and E-Tanks to account for. Mega Man 3, even though having a different visual concept for its pause menu, still had to have 2 menu pages for all of the abilities and E-Tanks. So, visuals aside, I think it was a positive change that Mega Man 4 switched to a full screen pause menu, as all of the abilities now fit on the screen at once. Because it's one page, it nicely saves on time, and that minor annoyance of looking for the ability you want to equip. As I talked about in my Mega Man 1 video, the one kind of unavoidable problem in having all of these boss abilities players might want to equip is that they'll constantly be needing to go in and out of the menu. So I think any attempt to limit flipping through menu pages is going to be a net positive. Another issue with the menus of Mega Man's 1 through 2 was the way that players found abilities. All of these abilities were designated with the starting letter of the ability players could equip, and that was it. So it took more brain work and time to know what letter was what ability. Mega Man 3 attempted to help solve this by showing a little icon on the side of the menu with what the selected ability looks like, and now the 2 starting letters of the ability's name. So, Mega Man 4's menu has a far better and more intuitive layout for showcasing what each ability is. All of the abilities have the boss's name above them, show how much of the ability is left, and have an icon of what the ability looks like immediately next to the name. The one thing you're losing out on with this full screen menu is not seeing the layout of the stage while selecting your ability. And while that could certainly be a negative if you're in the middle of some action moment, likely due to the memory limitations of the NES, whenever players would pull up the menu in Mega Man's 1 through 3, all of the sprites would disappear, and only tileset and backgrounds would remain, so you would be losing visual info on where the players and enemies were anyways. So, all of that is to say, I think the way the menu functions in Mega Man 4 is a big plus, helps with potential player confusion, saves time, and I think it was a nice UI upgrade. And speaking of the UI, let's talk about the art in general. While on a personal and subjective level, I'm not the biggest fan of the art for Dustman or Drillman stages from an artistic standpoint, I do think overall, the tileset work and animations are really well done in Mega Man 4. While Mega Man 2 had an upgraded chip compared to Mega Man 1, and Mega Man 3 then upgraded to the MMC3 chip series, I'm honestly not sure if Mega Man 4 through 6 had a better chip than 3. To my understanding, Mega Man's 3 through 6 all used an MMC3 chip, but I'm not sure if 4 through 6 then used a better version of it. Anyways, if there is an upgrade, I don't think it's as drastic, but there's still some really cool things I want to point out. Dive Man stage with various animated water or fire cylinders integrated into the tile set looks particularly nice. Ringman stage having moving platforms with an animated rainbow pattern stands out in a good way. The burning junk of Dustman's boss chamber looks cool, and the nice variation of ridges on the background of Skullman stage all stand out, especially with the inclusion of fossils into the background tile set of Skullman stage. Pharaoh Man stage has a couple of cool animated tricks, with the quicksand itself looking nice with a couple different animations smartly strung together. Additionally, I really like the indoor blue flame having an animated glow around it. Finally, I think all of the water effects in Toadman stage work really well. Overall, it certainly is a good looking Mega Man game, and I think the graphics are at the point where I think they have that pixelated NES charm. On the music side, I think this is another incredibly strong soundtrack for the Mega Man series. The sound composition was credited to Ojalin and Boon Boon, with Boon Boon being the alias of Yasuaki Fujita and the main composer on Mega Man 3. However, to my understanding, on Mega Man 4 he handled the sound programming and sound effects, whereas it was Ojalin, whose real name is Minae Fuji, who actually composed the soundtrack for Mega Man 4. To my personal taste, I don't think the soundtrack is overall as strong as Mega Man 2 or Mega Man 3's soundtracks, which are the classic series peak for me, but Mega Man 4's tracks overall rock, and there are a couple standouts for me. In particular, I really like Ringman's theme, Toadman's theme, Skullman's theme, Brightman's theme, and the Get a New Weapon theme, with Pharaoh Man's theme and Dive Man's theme being particular standouts for me. I also think both Dr. Cossack and Wily's Fortress songs are good, and in particular, Dr. Wily's final battle theme here is one of my favorite boss battle themes of the series. Also, this intro song is incredibly hype. While I'm not a huge fan of Dustman's theme, it's okay, I guess. I'm sure I'm being overly harsh here, but I don't like Drillman's theme at all, and for some reason it makes me feel bad. And now I'm going to play it for you, so you feel bad too. Back to the game, and being a little more objective, it's on to Skullman stage. A stage that actually has good music. Drillman. Skullman stage is very much set around enemies and small corridors. While we've seen enemy-centric stages before, I think the smaller corridors the player is typically forced to go down helps to set Skullman stage apart from other enemy-centric levels. The enemies here are also built to play off of that concept, with turrets shooting bouncing balls, lob shot enemies who can hit players on a lower corridor, or the hot dog enemies I mentioned during Dustman stage. I also like the design around these skull enemies, who crumble when attacked with a normal pea shooter shot, then reform, and can only truly be destroyed with a powerful shot like a fully charged Mega Buster attack. It's a nice way to play off of the new charge mechanic, and I'm glad the team was thinking about this for normal enemies. Beyond that though, I honestly don't have too much to say about Skullman's stage, so let's move on to Skullman himself. It's actually interesting that, something I never noticed as a kid, is Skullman's fight doesn't really start until the player puts in a controller input. This input will trigger Skullman to begin his actual attack sequence, and from there, a lot of his attacks are based upon the player's inputs and choices. He'll either perform a short or large jump towards the player, use his skull shield to protect himself from attacks, run at the player's position, or shoot a series of attacks. As such, I always found this fight to be incredibly difficult. I feel like I can lock him into a bit more of a manageable pattern where he'll shoot, then jump, use his Skull Shield, then run at the player, and repeat. But I honestly don't know how or why, as he is basing his actions on my controller inputs. I think this way to design a boss where it reads the player inputs instead of having a set pattern has its perks and downsides. On the positive end, if you want a fight that feels more random and forces most players to be reactionary, this is definitely going to give you that feeling. But on the downside, if you want patterns players can recognize and react to, it's much more difficult, I think, to achieve that here, as players are inadvertently putting in controller inputs in order to avoid attacks, which feels a little more hectic than controlling when you choose to attack, as Skull Man is reading both directional and attack inputs. While it's much more difficult, as this boss is doing specific actions based on your inputs, that does mean that players in the know can figure out how to cheese him, as, while there is a little bit of randomization, you are controlling him as well as Mega Man in a way. To my personal tastes, I prefer when bosses have tells and interesting patterns, but I don't want to claim this boss is objectively bad because I have a different preference, and I do understand what the team was going for here. And to that end, just like Toadman being an overly easy boss in Mega Man 4, I'm okay with there being a boss like this who is far more challenging and has a different methodology players will have to adapt to. If players are struggling, like I often did as a kid, and sometimes still do, they can use Dustman's Dust Crusher on Skull Man to help take him down a little quicker, as it deals slightly more damage than a charge shot, and players won't have to take time to charge it. With Skull Man refossilized, Mega Man will obtain the Skull Barrier, and it's off to another stage I enjoy quite a bit, Dive Man. While the water mechanic of the Mega Man games, with Mega Man jumping as high as the water level, was introduced in Mega Man 2 with Bubble Man stage, the concept wasn't really explored further in Mega Man 3. Yes, there were a few sections with water, but the water was overall pretty inconsequential. So it's nice then to see this mechanic explored further in Dive Man stage with a new idea around it. As I mentioned earlier in the video, much of Bubble Man stage was about the idea of, you can now jump super high, so don't jump too high or you'll jump to your instant death. And while we see a bit of that in Dive Man stage, really, a lot of it seems to be more based around the idea of weaving through obstacles with Mega Man's jump height. To that end, there are robot jellyfish who are placed to force players to jump a certain way, as well as mines that, while can explode and open up the path, are also quickly avoidable if players try to weave through. It's also nice that, while the first half of the stage opens with this concept by utilizing the jellyfish who are a little less menacing, it also lets players jump over, rather than through, as an option. However, the final portion of the stage then adds these insta-kill spikes that raise and lower with the water, forcing players to really work within the confines of the water to weave through the obstacles if they don't want to be patient and wait out the mine explosions. While players can use Rush Marine here if they want, I honestly don't think it's all that helpful. In fact, I think Rush Marine is even less helpful in Mega Man 4 than Mega Man 3, as there aren't really any particularly useful sections I can think of. Although, it is fun to note that there's a bug here during the rising and lowering water section, where it seems like Rush Marine works to only adjust player height once they press up or down. So, as that's the case, players can hop into Rush Marine, go to the top of the raising and lowering water when it's at its peak, and if they only press left or right, they'll fly through the air. One final thing in this stage is Moby the Whale Robot sub-boss. As I mentioned before, I'm not a fan of the fact that we get two of the exact same battles throughout the stage. Although, if you mash the Mega Buster, you can quickly obliterate Moby, making most of his attacks pretty meaningless. I do like the idea for this attack, where little, mines I guess, rain down and the player has to avoid them and shoot. But otherwise, Moby kinda just feels like a mash attack obstacle in the way, that's really more time consuming than interesting to me. Make it through the mines, and you'll reach Dive Man. Dive Man is a fairly simple boss. He'll either shoot homing missiles at Mega Man, or use his torpedo attack. While this can be difficult if players are jumping around a bunch and trying to shoot things individually, I found that if you try to always stick to the wall, so sliding away to the wall anytime you're not at it, only use your charge shot, and jump over Dive Man whenever you have to, it's a pretty easy fight. The charge shot will power through the dive missiles, and even though they home in on Mega Man, as long as you're at the wall, you won't have to worry about them too much, as they only ever become an issue when Mega Man jumps, meaning they're now tracking on the y-axis. So, as far as I can tell, this boss definitely favors players using the new charge mechanic, as it will barrel through all of the missiles, which is a nice touch to the fight. Dive Man is weak to the Skull Barrier, and as this is more of a shield ability, it forces players to be next to their opponent if they actually want to injure them. So this ends up actually working out well for Dive Man, as players can jump as high as they want and can use that vertical space to regularly get close, then get away from Dive Man. It makes this boss weakness far more viable, so I think it was clever the team chose to have Dive Man to be the boss weak to it. Defeat Dive Man and you'll obtain the Dive Missile. So it's off to the final stage, and my favorite stage, Drill Man. And that's all I have to say about Drill Man, so let's move on to Dr. Cossack. I'm honestly not sure if it's pronounced Dr. Cossack or Dr. Cossack, so I apologize if I'm pronouncing it the wrong way. Okay, fine, let's go back to Drill Man. Honestly, I'm sure I'm being unfair in just how much I dislike this stage and boss. I think a lot of it has to do with something about the music and art design not clicking with me, plus Drill Man is just a brutal boss fight in every way. But let's start with the stage. As I mentioned earlier, like Dustman's stage, Drill Man's stage is a sequence of disparate challenges. First we encounter a few enemies, then an instant death spike section, and finally, this sequence with boulders dropping and players needing to activate the tile set to proceed. The spike section has a few good challenges, with the bats serving as good obstacles in an area where players will want to avoid a misstep. In particular though, I really like this screen with the 1-up precariously placed past a bed of spikes. This would be an easy jump to make if it weren't for the tile set preventing Mega Man from jumping to his full potential. So instead, it ends up being far more challenging of a jump than it might look. The reward though is a 1-up. And I think this is a great balance and way to present a reward like a 1-up. Yes, you can completely ignore it, but it's a good enough reward to be tempting for many players to want to attempt this much more difficult challenge. Afterwards, there's a short sequence where spikes will linger over the player. It's kind of funny though, because unless players intentionally jump into the first set of spikes, the other ceiling spikes are above Mega Man's jump arc. It does make me wonder if, initially, these spikes were one tile set lower, which would have bumped into Mega Man's full jump arc, but in testing, they found it was too difficult and frustrating for too many players. That's obviously a guess, but other than the somewhat interesting window dressing of it, it really doesn't do or mean anything. So either it's just there as a visual flair, or perhaps my theory holds water. While both initial sections are okay, the real meat of the stage, in my mind, is this section with boulders dropping and the player flipping on the tile set. The boulders dropping can be difficult to deal with if players don't use boss abilities. They begin dropping when players reach a certain distance from their chutes, and when they do drop, they explode into smaller boulder bits that can hurt Mega Man. So I think the ideal way to deal with this is to prep a charge shot and shoot the boulder as it's falling, then proceed before another one drops and it's too late. That'll require somewhat precise timing on the player's part, and require players understand this is what the obstacle is doing. The cool thing about this obstacle though, is that there are two abilities that will handily deal with it, both the Pharaoh Shot and Skull Barrier. The Skull Barrier is the obvious one here, as players can activate it to protect them, making it destroy the boulder as it drops before hitting Mega Man. The Pharaoh Shot is fun in that it utilizes the fully charged Pharaoh Shot, which will hang out over Mega Man's head. This never gets destroyed until players shoot it, so in essence, it acts just like the Skull Barrier, but uses less weapon energy. The other interesting concept to this section are these switches that turn on the tile set. And when I say they turn on the tile set, I really mean that. It's not just a light switch. If players don't activate a switch or overshoot jumping for one, they'll hurtle to their death. I do like this accuracy jumping test, as the obstacle is built up in a nice way where players are safely introduced to the concept first, jumping to hit the switch with no consequence, before various jumping challenges are introduced, where players will have to jump to unknown safety while also hitting the switch. Overall, while the stage doesn't have an overall cohesion to the concepts and ideas throughout, each individual section has some good ideas throughout. So I think my distaste of this stage really does have more to do with the music and art, rather than the actual game design, on top of the fact that it all leads to one of my least favorite bosses in the entire classic series. Drill Man. Drill Man is both a difficult and a very annoying boss. He'll either dive into the ground, then shoot out at Mega Man's location, jump in general, or walk and shoot out his exploding drills. The exploding drills are difficult to deal with as they shoot out quickly, and if they explode near the player, they have a much larger radius. He does have a tell though, so it's not like this is impossible to avoid or anything like that. Players will also need to sometimes jump over him in order to avoid taking damage during this phase, which can also be difficult as he has a larger size due to the drill on his head. So while this phase is difficult overall, I do think it has a more learnable and potentially fun pattern, even though it can be difficult to get down. The real issue in this fight stems from his primary attack, where he drills into the ground and attempts to shoot out at the player. He'll become invincible, meaning players can't get shots in when he goes to drill, and then will be underground for a pretty long time. In scanning my footage to rewatch while writing this section, most of my scanning was just seeing him constantly underground. For players who don't understand how to avoid this attack, this can be brutal, as I do think it takes time to learn decent strategies, and the attack hurts Mega Man for a large chunk of his health. What I liked to do as a kid was wait for a set period of time at one end of the stage, then start running or sliding across, which would seem to usually, but not always, work. In playing a few months ago, I came up with this stutter step strategy that seemed to work flawlessly, until I tried it when re-recording recently and it didn't work. If players slide non-stop back and forth, this strategy does seem to work, although I doubt it's a 100% strategy, as there are times when you're turning back around where the timing I would guess wouldn't work out for players. Apparently, there's a strategy I found from watching Nico Evaluates on YouTube where players can hug the wall while counting Mega Man's walk cycles in order to always avoid this. While this strategy works, it's so unintuitive, I doubt most people would ever come up with it on their own. So what you end up with is an attack where avoiding it, I feel like a lot of times can feel like luck rather than skill, which isn't a good thing, especially for an attack that takes off so much health. On top of that, it's kind of boring, not including him jumping and drilling into the ground while he's invincible, which takes a full 1 second, or popping up. The wait period for him fully underground is roughly 4 seconds long. That means a roughly 5-second long wait period where players can't do much of anything. And this attack happens frequently, making for a not only dangerous fight, but one that can become boring too. My friend and I currently have a similar attack in the game we're working on, where the prologue boss jumps out of range, then will slam back down after a set period of time. However, we currently have the time the boss is out of the screen set to randomly be between 1 and 1.5 seconds, because we don't want players to sit around waiting, and even in testing our own fight, 1.5 to 2.5 seconds felt way too long. And here, you have an attack where players can't do anything that happens frequently, which in total lasts for roughly 5 seconds. While I'll be curious to see if there are Drill Man defenders out there, for me, the mix of the overall difficulty of the fight with the boring drilling sections make for a boss fight I generally dread doing. Defeat Drill Man, and we've defeated our final Robot Master. So that means we now have every ability, meaning it's time for me to go over each one and give you my thoughts, along with my disclaimer I've done in every video. As a kid, I never used boss abilities unless I needed to against bosses or for required progression. So I'm relatively new to using these for this video, so think of this as more of a newcomer's thoughts. For defeating Toadman, players will receive the Rain Flush ability. The Rain Flush is a full screen attack that will either damage or destroy everything it touches. While it doesn't destroy everything, it is incredibly powerful. And to that end, it's balanced by having Mega Man shoot up a pod that will become the rain itself. The time it takes between shooting the pod and for the pod to explode into rain acts as a really great balancing tool. I think with a powerful full screen attack like this, you really only have a few ways to balance it. For example, Mega Man 8 has a similar attack, and it's balanced by giving Mega Man an incredibly limited number of uses of it. But I actually prefer the way Toadman's Rain Flush is balanced. While players have more uses of the attack, the fact that it takes a while to activate can make it really tricky to use in order to get out of dire situations. And players will really have to have some forethought for when they want to shoot out a pod, oftentimes needing to use it before the enemies even appear on screen. So I think that's really cool, and I like this ability a lot. For defeating Brightman, players will receive the Flash Stopper ability. The Flash Stopper ability is a nearly identical ability to Flashman's Time Stopper ability from Mega Man 2. However, it took my issues with the Time Stopper and improved on it in pretty much every single way, which is funny to me, because when I criticized the Time Stopper and gave my notes for how I would have liked for it to act, I'd actually completely forgotten Mega Man 4 had a similar ability in the Flash Stopper, as I so rarely use boss abilities. And, as it turns out, the Flash Stopper actually applies pretty much every negative note I had for the Time Stopper. Whereas the Time Stopper froze time permanently until the ability ran out of juice, meaning players could only use it once until they filled up on energy ammo again, the Flash Stopper instead freezes time for a limited period of time and only uses up a portion of its ammo bar. That alone, for me, makes this ability much more fun to use. But the other adjustment to it is one that I think is more so thanks to the new charge shot. In Mega Man 2, when players used the Time Stopper, they couldn't shoot any attack at all until the Flash Stopper used up its power. However, while the Flash Stopper of Mega Man 4 doesn't let players use the charge shot, it does let players still shoot Mega Man's normal P-shooter attack after time is frozen. That means this ability can be used in far more situations and is, overall, much more fun to utilize. While it's debatable if the Time Stopper from Mega Man 2 would have become OP if players could also shoot, considering there was no charge shot back then, it does still help balance out the Flash Stopper of Mega Man 4 that Mega Man can't use his more powerful attack when time is frozen. For defeating Pharaoh Man, players will receive the Pharaoh Shot ability. This ability is a bit of a mixed bag, I think. It's similar to the charge shot, of course, in that you charge up the Pharaoh Shot. However, its uniqueness comes in that players can shoot the ability in different directions, similar to the Metal Blade of Mega Man 2, and that the attack hovers over Mega Man's head while it's charging. For me, because Mega Man now has his own charge shot, I'm not sure if we needed a boss ability charge shot, even though I do enjoy the ball that forms overhead and some of the fun things players can do with that. But, like Shadow Man's Shadow Blade of Mega Man 3, it does serve as a way to be similar to Metal Man's Metal Blade without being as OP. The base shot is less powerful than the Metal Blade, but can still shoot in most directions, and it consumes more ammo. So I do think it is a better and more balanced attack than the Metal Blade. For defeating Ringman, players will receive the Ring Boomerang ability. This one is a close-range attack, similar to Quickman's Quick Boomerang. The nice thing about the Ring Boomerang is that it can travel through enemies, much like a charge shot, but it's then balanced by being close range. I think that's a nice balance for an ability that might otherwise be too OP, and this is yet another great boss ability from Mega Man 4. For defeating Dustman, players will receive the Dust Crusher ability. The Dust Crusher ability bursts when hitting enemies, with smaller pellets shooting out that can also hit other enemies. While this can be useful, sometimes it's a little more rare, and I think this is one of the attacks that didn't work out quite as well for Mega Man 4. The team made the choice for the Dust Crusher not to be affected by the game's tile set, and it will fly right through walls. And while I understand there could be a lingering enemy past a wall, and for that reason, players might not want the wall to affect the Dust Crusher, I also think that was a mistake, and takes away from what makes this attack unique. In my opinion, this attack would be far better and more interesting if it broke into its little pieces anytime it hit an enemy or tile set piece. That would mean players could use the walls to break the Dust Crusher and hit enemies diagonally to them, in front or behind, whereas right now, it's kinda just a normal projectile with a rare chance a piece will fling off and hit something. For defeating Skullman, players will receive the Skull Barrier ability. The Skull Barrier is similar to the Leaf Shield of Mega Man 2, but I think better handled. While the Leaf Shield, similar to the Skull Barrier, put a spinning barrier around Mega Man, if the player hit any direction on the D-pad, the Leaf Shield would then shoot in that direction, really just making it another projectile. Here though, the Skull Barrier will follow along with the player even when they're moving, truly making it a shield type ability, and I appreciate it for that. For defeating Dive Man, players will receive the Dive Missile ability. The Dive Missile is a homing attack, but it's kind of funny in that it sort of weaves off into weird directions sometimes when it's homing in on an enemy, not always taking the direct path. And weirdly, I actually think that's a good thing. This is the one attack that stands the most chance of being way too powerful, but because of the weird weaving, it actually balances this attack out. For defeating Drill Man, players will receive the Drill Bomb ability. The Drill Bomb is just like the Crash Bomb of Mega Man 2, except better. While the Crash Bomb would attach to a wall and then eventually explode, the Drill Bomb immediately explodes into an AoE attack. But what makes this ability stand out is that if players tap the attack button a second time when a drill is on screen, it will immediately explode into its AoE. I actually never knew this as a kid, and I think it really elevates this ability above both the Crash Bomb and Hard Knuckle, as players can choose to activate an AoE with it. So those are all of the abilities of Mega Man 4. To my opinion, this is the best collection of boss abilities so far in the Mega Man games, from Mega Man's 1 through 4. Just about every ability is unique and well balanced. The only one I think could have really been improved upon was the Dust Crusher, so 7 out of 8 is pretty dang impressive. With all of the Robot Masters defeated, it's off to fight the mysterious scientist Dr. Cossack. For real this time. I've realized I don't have as much to say about the end section stages as the Robot Master stages, so instead, I'm going to organize all of the stages in a section, then all of the bosses in a section. Similar to Dr. Wily's castle, players are now funneled into a series of linear stages making their way through Dr. Cossack's Citadel, with, like Mega Man 2's first Wily stage, the first stage being a stage about scaling the wall and breaking into the Citadel. These stages consist of some ideas revisited, like the hot dog robots in situations where the player can better avoid them by jumping or sliding, or the up and down enemies more thoroughly explored, while also introducing some brand new concepts and some generally good obstacles. In particular, I'd like to highlight this ladder section from the first Dr. Cossack stage, where, unless players skip the challenge with the balloon or rush jet, they'll need to drop down from one ladder to another while also dealing with this clamping obstacle. It's a nice way to make climbing challenges, which are generally a little dull in Mega Man games, far more interesting. This tile that has spikes switch directions, from vertical to horizontal, is a generally speaking clever obstacle, and a nice variation of the invisible block concept requiring players to time out their jumps, but with lower stakes. Probably the most interesting stage in this collection is the third Dr. Cossack stage, which is an auto-scroller. The only other time we saw an auto-scroller section in Mega Man was during the Dragon Robot fight of Mega Man 2. I feel like this is a pretty standard platform challenge to see, as it can easily make what would otherwise be an easy platforming section far more stressful and challenging, and I think it works well here. There's also an introduction to these platforms that I always thought of as floating cheese blocks. They'll slowly lower when Mega Man stands on them, and then shoot up when Mega Man jumps off. This is a cool concept, and while it's used well here, especially in the final sequence where players need to slowly ride one down to an opening, I think it's a good enough concept that it could have been explored a little further in a non-auto-scroll stage. I think overall, the challenges in Dr. Cossack's stages are mostly unique and well done. The only one that ends up being pretty uninteresting is the Rush Jet sequence of Dr. Cossack Stage 2. Unlike Mega Man 3, where Rush Jet could travel in any direction, or Item 2 of Mega Man 2, where Item 2 would only blast forwards, the team found a nice balance with the Rush Jet of Mega Man 4. Rush Jet will only blast forwards, but players can still control the vertical height of Rush Jet, and while I think that's a good way to balance Rush Jet, in Stage 2, and the real Rush Jet challenge of the game, all we really get is a short, straightforward sequence where players will ride Rush Jet to some energy recharges, and that's basically it. It's nice that there's less potential for soft locking here like in Mega Man 3, and it's probably better than the blasting forward until you finally jump of Mega Man 2, but yeah, I think it ends up feeling a little pointless here. So that's really all I have to say on the Cossack stages. They're competently done, but I've never really found, generally speaking, the Wily or Cossack stages to be as interesting or as unique feeling as the Robot Master stages. The bosses we get for the Dr. Cossack stages are Mothraya, a big moth robot, the Square Machine, the Cockroach Twins, and Dr. Cossack and his Cossack Catcher. While I think they have some good concepts, they end up being surprisingly easy. Mothraya has a cool concept where it will destroy the ground underneath it, in theory, making the boss fight much harder for players, as it will also sometimes shoot out projectiles. But really, the danger of a boss like this comes in it destroying the ground and creating a hazard, whether that be an instant death pit, or some sort of obstacle that will injure the player if they fall in. But, as there's a double layer of the tile set here, and it's so incredibly easy to destroy this boss, the true obstacle of the boss seems to be a non-factor here, which is a bit of a shame. The square machine is a cool concept, where the pieces of the boss fly across the screen, with players needing to avoid them until they form together to create a battle space for the boss. While I think, conceptually, this is a cool boss fight idea, with players needing to trap themselves into the actual boss fight for a set period of time, after players know what to do, and the mystery is gone, like Drill Man, this boss ends up being a lot of waiting around. It's not like avoiding the flying pieces are particularly difficult, as the slide will automatically keep players safe. So this is another boss that I think is conceptually cool, but could have probably used a little more work to make it less waiting around. The Cockroach Twin boss is another really simple one. A cockroach robot will come out and shoot at the player, with the real issue being that players could get knocked back into a bed of spikes. Once it's defeated, a twin will come out with a slightly more difficult projectile to avoid. While this is another easy one, I do think this boss was pulled off the best of the three I've mentioned so far, as the danger is real, and one mistake could cost players dearly. As a side note, it probably does make sense that all of these bosses are on the easier side, as dying to one will set players back quite a bit. Instead of being sent back to the pre-boss chamber gate, for some reason the team decided a death will send players back to the halfway point of the stage. Even though the bosses are easier here, I'm not sure if I agree with that extra level of punishment. But perhaps, really, that was the team's way to balance out the difficulty of these bosses. That said, even dying to the later Dr. Wily Castle bosses returns players back to the halfway point, so I'm not entirely sure if that was the justification. The final boss of the bunch is the Cossack Catcher, which is a claw machine game boss. This is yet another simple boss in the series of them, with an easy projectile pattern and players simply needing to occasionally slide to safety. While the collection of bosses are overall on the easier side in terms of difficulty, I still do think they're pretty fun to fight. It just seems, to me, like their difficulty could have at least been tilted slightly up. I suppose though, these bosses being pretty easy does make sense thematically. As it turns out, Dr. Wily captured Dr. Cossack's daughter, and he was being forced to do these evil deeds in order to keep his daughter safe. So, with the truth revealed as Pharaoh Man saves Dr. Cossack's daughter, it's onto the real final set of stages, Dr. Wily's Castle. This does bring about both the twist of Mega Man 4 and a pretty major design decision. The twist, of course, being that there's not just one fortress players will be making their way through, but two fortresses. In Mega Man 1, there was simply Dr. Wily's Castle. Mega Man 2 then perfected the overall concept with the Wily Castle map and a more simplified boss rush idea. Mega Man 3 then experimented with this endgame concept by introducing the Dock robots. After Mega Man defeated all of the robot masters, they then had to choose between 4 non-linear, far more challenging stages, and after completing those, could head to Wily's Castle. And now, in Mega Man 4, the second half of the game has been extended by instead having 2 sets of linear castle stages, Dr. Cossack's Citadel, and then Dr. Wily's Castle. While I don't mind being funneled into these linear stages, I do think the non-linear design of the Mega Man games is part of what set it apart from other games of the time. And to that end, if the team wanted to extend the length of the game, I think the non-linear solution of Mega Man 3 with the Dock robots was more interesting, as it kept with the non-linear theme of the Mega Man games. Not counting the boss rush stages of Mega Man's 2 or 3, or boss-only stages, Mega Man 1 had 4 Wily stages, Mega Man 2 had 4 Wily stages, Mega Man 3 had 4 Dock robot stages, and then 3 Wily stages. And now, Mega Man 4 has 4 Dr. Cossack stages and 2 Wily stages, really making a total of 6 linear, final, non-boss rush stages. So it's not like Mega Man 4's linear sequence of stages is all that much longer than the previous games. To my personal taste, I think by the end it starts to feel like a bit of a slog, and I tend to start missing the level theming of the non-linear stages. These final stages start to blend together a bit for me, which is probably why I've organized this section the way I did. But that's just me. In general, I don't have any problem with linear stage progression. I just don't think this is where these games shine. So extending the length of this portion isn't my favorite way to extend the length of these games. but I am curious where you, watching this video, stand. So here we are at Dr. Wily's castle. There's really only 2 stages here before the boss rush. The first stage is the mandatory invisible block stage, with a couple sequences that really aren't too challenging. It also has a Bubble Man style underwater spike challenge with one particularly difficult jump. While overall, the stage isn't too challenging, the fact we haven't seen invisible blocks or this type of underwater challenge in Mega Man 4, specifically, does make the stage feel like its own thing within the context of the game. Wily Stage 2 is a sequence of spike or enemy challenges, but honestly, it's so generic, I had to look up and rewatch footage to even remember what the stage was. And that's coming from someone who regularly replays these games. Nothing about it is bad, but nothing stands out either. So it really ends up feeling pretty bland, in my opinion, and doesn't really help justify the extra linear stage here. The first boss in Wily's castle is the Metall Daddy. All this daddy does is jump and slam the ground, which, similar to Gutsman in Mega Man 1, and like Gutsman, will freeze Mega Man if he's touching the ground when the slam hits. This slam will cause some basic metal enemies to drop from the ceiling, who will then run off and out of the screen. And that's it. It's a simple fight, but can be tough if players miss sliding under a large leap. I do think it ends up being more challenging than the other Fortress fights so far, and can be a fun little fight, even if it's not all that complex. For making it to the end of the second stage, players will reach the Tako Trash boss, with Tako being Japanese for octopus. Players will need to jump on one of 2 conveyor belt platforms and use these to reach the height they need to shoot at the Tako Trash's weak point, all while the Tako Trash shoots out lob shot boulder bombs from its forehead and fireballs from its mouth. This is, to my opinion, by far the most interesting boss fight of the bunch. The fight will require a good mix of strategy and reactionary gameplay, with players needing to decide which platform is the best to be on, maintain their height, and avoid a variety of shots all while doing so. As this boss is fairly challenging, it's then annoying that, like in Dr. Cossack Citadel, if players die, they'll be returning to the halfway point of the stage rather than the boss gate. Otherwise, I like this fight a lot. The final stage is a boss rush, but as I already talked about my thoughts on boss rushes in previous videos, there's really nothing more to say. So let's move on to Wily Machine 4. This boss, for me, lives on in infamy. A fun fact about myself is that, while I love Mega Man 4, it was actually the final of the NES Mega Man games I ever completed because I struggled so much against Wily Machine 4 very specifically. The first phase is simple enough. The outer skull-shaped shell of the machine will shoot giant fireballs at Mega Man. While these fireballs are large, they shoot as a series of 3, so it's easy enough to slide underneath all 3, run back, and shoot Dr. Wily with a charge shot, then rinse and repeat without taking any damage. The real challenge comes in Phase 2, where the outer shell will break off, and Dr. Wily will now start moving back and forth as he shoots his fireballs in both a downwards and upwards trajectory, always shooting them at the player's position, making it far more challenging to avoid them. On top of that, and what made this truly challenging for me, even with E-Tanks, is that he has a blinking light that's his weak point, which has a very small radius to hit. Sometimes I can hit it with my fully charged Mega Buster, sometimes I can't. It seems like you have to be at exactly the peak of Mega Man's jump arc when you shoot for this attack to hit, otherwise, it's bouncing off Wily's shell. That then brings up the issues with most of Mega Man's weapons in general. Mega Man can't jump high enough for most of these weapons to hit Dr. Wily, including this phase's weakness of the drill bomb. So what I would always do as a kid was switch to Rush Coil to try and get enough height to then land a blow on Dr. Wily, and pray I wasn't hit on the way up or down, and then run out of my Rush Coil energy and E-Tanks and lose. I also didn't know, as a kid, that the drill bomb could explode if you tap the button again. So really, the ideal way to deal with this fight is to shoot the drill bomb at Wily, then purposefully explode it before it touches him so the AoE attack hits him. And while that's a cool concept, I never knew that. On the Mega Buster only end, there's also a strategy I never knew where players can run underneath the Wily Machine to safety and use this to time out points in time when they can run out, jump and attack the weak point, then run back to safety. So this is kind of an interesting one to me, because I always struggled so much with this boss, and really, the ideal way to deal with it is one very specific attack I never realized you could do. Because I was a player who didn't like using boss abilities very much, and even when I did use them, I didn't realize you could tap a second time after shooting the drill bomb to make it explode. But this is one of the final bosses of the game, so I'm actually not too bothered about that. Technically, the boss is beatable without his weakness, which I like. And really, it's okay for a final boss to require players have full knowledge of the game. I actually kind of think it's on me for not knowing this. In the end, it's still not my favorite Wily Machine fight of the series, and I still think it's one of the more challenging ones, even knowing what to do, but you can stock up to 9 E-Tanks in Mega Man 4, so I think the game's pretty forgiving to players. After defeating the Wily Machine, Wily will, of course, escape. We're 4 games in, and this isn't shocking anymore. So, players will enter a secret final stage that's underground, and seems to be a general copy of the concept from Mega Man 2, but not as interesting. While Mega Man 2 was genuinely surprising, as it was the first time this happened, it also cut out the music and has cool, creepy atmospheric sound effects. Mega Man 4, on the other hand, keeps the general stage music playing, and doesn't have any of the same creepy ambiance, which is a shame. It makes the build-up to the Wily Capsule honestly feel a little generic. But after a short run-up, players will reach the Wily Capsule, and a concept the teams seem to love so much will see repeated time and time again in future games. Players will find themselves in a pitch-black room. Wily will charge up an energy attack, and then, as it shoots towards Mega Man, lights will briefly flash revealing Wily's location somewhere on the screen. While you could imagine this would be perfect for something like the homing dive missile, the team opted to make Wily invincible to that attack, I suppose to keep the battle tough. The Wily Capsule is also immune to the Mega Buster, meaning players will be required to use weapon energy in order to defeat the boss. In this case, he can only be injured by the Ring Boomerang and Pharaoh Shot, with the Pharaoh Shot performing far more damage. While Mega Man 2 had the issue that if players died to Alien Wily after using up too much of the Bubble Lead attack and his only weakness, they'd be SOL and need to force a game over to get their weapon energy back. At the very least, there are enemies leading up to the Wily Capsule, so players can farm for energy if they choose. While this battle can be pretty tough, the Pharaoh Shot does enough damage against the Wily Capsule to make it feel fair, and definitely more fair than a future Wily Capsule that will be coming up. Defeat the Wily Capsule, and Dr. Wily will beg for forgiveness for the 4th time, before escaping. His castle explodes, Mega Man rides a train home to greet Roll and Rush, and that's it. Honestly, probably one of the least satisfying endings so far, but I do like that the tradition of showing the Robot Master order and number continues into the credits. And that's it! Mega Man 4 completed. Mega Man 4 is a pretty big turning point for the Mega Man series, with its chart shot really changing the feeling, direction, and trajectory of future games. The chart shot definitely helps keep Mega Man from feeling stale as the 4th entry into a now long-running series, and a number of concepts were introduced that, to my opinion, would really be expanded upon and perfected in future games. While I personally prefer the feel of Mega Man's 2 and 3 without the chart shot, and really think the chart shot is much more fun in the more complex Mega Man X series, it's hard to deny just how many things Mega Man 4 did right. From some great level theming and challenge concepts, to the most balanced boss weapons so far. While it's not my favorite game in the series, I can understand the love for the game that some people have. Ranking the classic Mega Man games amongst themselves, for me, I'd place Mega Man 4 as an A-tier game. It has great music, it has great level design, some brand new ideas, and of course, fantastic boss weapons. It just isn't peak Mega Man, for me specifically. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed and you missed them, I hope you'll go back and check out my other videos in this series. They take a lot of work, and I'm pretty proud of some of the design discussions in them. And speaking of design, I'm actually working on my own game, ChivalBee, with a buddy of mine. We're still very much in the alpha phase of the game, hence why this footage just has placeholder backgrounds and the tileset is auto laid out. But we're slowly making progress, and if the game looks at all interesting to you, we'd appreciate your support by subscribing to our YouTube channel. We'll post cool updates when we have them. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace. Hey Faye, hey Yuki, hi. Hi, hello, 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 hi. Hi, oh, are you gonna join the shoot? Do you wanna be in the shoot? Yeah, hi. Hi girls, hi. Hello, you wanna be in the video? You wanna be in the video? Okay.